Welcome, weary traveler, to a place where the line between the living and the dead blurs, where the ancient ruins whisper tales of souls lost and found. Tonight, let us journey into the world of dark souls, a land shrouded in mystery and shadow, where the undead roam the forgotten paths of a once great kingdom. As you listen to the soft echoes of a world long past, let the gentle tones of the night relax you into a peaceful slumber. Together, we'll explore the haunting beauty of this realm, where even in darkness, a quiet calm prevails. So, close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let the tale of the undead soothe you until you're in the magical state of sleep. Who would allow such powerful spirits to be hollowed out so completely? Is there truly nothing that can be done? Nothing at all to save them? Tonight, we venture deep into the enigmatic world of the Way of White, uncovering its tangled teachings, its hypocritical leaders, and its unsettling connection to the undead curse. As we begin our journey, let us first explore the very name of this faith, the Way of White. It has long been thought that this religion is devoted to Gwyn, the supreme lord of Lordran. The name Gwyn itself is of Welsh origin, meaning white, which aligns with the title Way of White. This might suggest that the faith either carries out Gwyn's will or leads followers toward him. In a world where gods are worshipped, it seems logical that one would revere Gwyn, the most powerful of them all. Further evidence of a connection between the Way of White and Gwyn can be found in the figure of Havel, a battle companion of Gwyn. Havel's armor can be found in Anorlando, a place closely associated with the gods. It is possible that Havel was not just a warrior but also a bishop, perhaps even the head bishop of the Way of White, given his possession of the White Seance Ring. However, since this ring is linked specifically to the Way of White, and the descriptions of Havel as a bishop do not explicitly mention his affiliation with this faith, we cannot be entirely certain of this connection. But if Havel was indeed the head bishop of the Way of White and a Roy of Thorland, it would establish a direct link between this faith and Gwyn, owing to Havel's close association with him. As a bishop, Havel would traditionally oversee a cathedral, and there is indeed a grand cathedral in Anorlando. Perhaps his royal lineage in Thorland afforded him the opportunity to attain such a prestigious position. There are other connections between the Way of White and the gods of Lordran. For instance, Paladin Leroy, a warrior of the Way of White, wielded a weapon that could only have been forged by the nameless blacksmith deity, who once held the powerful slabs required to create such legendary weapons. The ivory talisman used by followers of the Way of White resembles the design of Guinevere's dress, and her maidens are known to wield miracles. While these details do not conclusively prove a connection, they are compelling hints that the Way of White may have once worshipped Gwyn as their ultimate deity. However, as we delve deeper into the mysteries of this faith, we begin to question this connection. Despite the initial evidence, it appears that by the time the chosen undead arrives on the scene, the Way of White may have little, if any, true connection to Gwyn. In all the dialogues and items associated with the Way of White, Gwyn is never mentioned, not once. The gods and lords are spoken of, but never Gwyn himself. Instead, we hear a great many mentions of Viria Nox. But what does this term translate to? There is much debate over its meaning, as phrases like this, rooted in Latin, often do not follow perfect grammar. Yet, if we assume the grammar was intended to be correct, we can attempt a translation. Veri seems to be the first person of the present tense, a deponent verb that translates to I fear, or I am afraid. Though a deponent verb by nature, viria is transitive, meaning it can take an object. Yet, in this phrase, there is no word in the accusative case, nor is there any contextual hint of what might be feared. In this context, night becomes the entity being addressed, a dark and mysterious force to which fear is directed. It's an intriguing detail, but still, we find no mention of Gwyn, the Lord of Cinder. This absence is stark, especially when contrasted with Sorlair's frequent claims of serving the Lord of Sunlight, or Siegmeyer's references to Gwyn's will. Notably, Siegmeyer isn't a member of the Way of White. He bestows upon us the miracle emit force, which is described as foreign to the Way of White. This suggests that Siegmeyer is more likely aligned with the Warriors of Sunlight, or perhaps connected to Gwyn's firstborn, though the specifics of that connection are a tale for another time. It's possible to follow both Gwyn and his son, for Gwyn did not exile his son. The exile occurred only after Gwyn's death, and thus, it was not Gwyn's will. Solaire, who identifies as a warrior of the sun and an adherent of the Lord of Sunlight, is certainly not a member of the Way of White. His use of lightning spears further indicates his adherence to Gwyn's firstborn, showing that one can worship both the father and the son, reinforcing that Gwyn did not banish his son. This further deepens the divide between the Way of White and Gwyn. In the present day, Gwyn appears entirely absent from the Way of White. The only lord explicitly mentioned is Allfather Lloyd, who seems to be the supreme leader of the faith. We're told that even the head bishop of the Way of White serves as an apostle to Lloyd, suggesting that Lloyd holds the highest authority, much like the formation of other religious hierarchies. The gold coin, which holds the greatest value in the human world, bears the image of Allfather Lloyd with his halo, indicating his significant influence. Lloyd also commands cleric knights, implying that he wields both spiritual and martial power. However, as we mentioned in the timeline, Lloyd seems less connected to the world of the gods. We suspect he may have played a role in the creation of the first humans, or, at the very least, he has a strong connection to the human world. Lloyd appears in every facet of human life, on coins, within religion, and in the rounding up of the undead. Imagine a figure in real life whose face graces the currency, who leads the largest church, and commands an army. Such a person would wield immense power, and Lloyd certainly has a strong foothold in the land of humans. His name, Welsh in origin, means grey, a fitting symbol for one who straddles both worlds connected to the light soul of the first flame as Gwyn's uncle, yet deeply intertwined with the human realm, which is often associated with darkness. Thus, the uncle of Lord Gwyn is ever present in the human world. But what of Gwyn and the other lords when it comes to the Way of White? Oddly, figures like Old Man Macloif and Night King Rendell are featured on the other two coins, despite the fact that many other lords of greater relevance are still alive and active when the chosen undead arrives. Furthermore, all significant figures related to the Way of White, whether those we encounter or those described in items like the White Seance Ring and talismans, hail from Thorland. If the Way of White were truly devoted to the worship of Gwyn, we might expect to see a more direct connection to Lordran, perhaps in the form of a pilgrimage to Anna Lando, a place deeply tied to Gwyn. Yet, no member of the church seems to seek Anna Lando, nor do they even mention it. Moreover, no one affiliated with the Way of White or Thorland seems to follow the undead legend. This suggests a deeper divide, a split not just within the faith, but also between the desires of Lloyd and Gwendolyn. It further hints that Lloyd may have diverged from the other lords, positioning himself as a dominant force over humans. The priest's hat, worn exclusively by Way of White priests in Thorland, serves merely as a symbol of their status within the church's hierarchy. It carries almost no significance in the land of Lordran, reinforcing the notion of a growing rift between the Way of White and the Lords of Old, a peculiar division, especially if the faith still worships Gwyn. Solaire's Sunlit Talisman offers another clue. It declares that Solaire has unyielding faith, still devoted to the true, greatest Lord, and remains a warrior of sunlight. This statement implies that the Way of White may not only have drifted away from Gwyn, but may have become corrupted in some manner. The gods worshipped by the Way of White appear to be increasingly disconnected from those revered in Lordran. So, what then is the essence of this faith? To understand, we must examine the believers we encounter and, more importantly, the hierarchy within the faith. Let's start with those who are likely the lowest followers of the Way of White. Neither Petros nor Rhea fits this category. Petrus has been involved with the faith too long to retain any naivety, regardless of his rank, while Rhea hails from one of the foremost houses of Thorland, as indicated by Petrus calling her Maiden Thorland. And Your Highness, although she may be naive, she isn't representative of the typical follower of the faith. Her companions, however, offer a clearer picture. First, there is Vince, simple and loyal, a perfect example of the lower flock of the Way of White. He's like a sheep, easily guided by either a shepherd or a wolf. Then there's Nico, who speaks very little, but his rare mutterings remind us of the item, the Holy Robe, which mentions that those dissatisfied with church teachings must embark on a spiritual journey as a form of self-purification. Nico's quiet words suggest he may have glimpsed behind the church's veil and sensed deception. Petrus also expresses concern that Rhea's companions might be a bad influence on her, likely because of the potential impact on her faith. Both companions are meant to protect her on their mission, yet their influence could lead Rhea to question the very foundations of her belief. Thus, Vince represents those who follow blindly, while Nico embodies those who question. The Church, however, doesn't look kindly upon doubters, often sending them on perilous journeys to Lordran under the guise of purification. Moving up the hierarchy, we encounter Rhea herself. Rhea is young and naive. She appears to have committed some offense, or at least something perceived as such, evident in her dialogue when attacked, where she questions, "Is this my punishment?" Her character brings to mind Lady Farnese from Berserk, a member of the Vendimia family, who served the pontiff, the equivalent of a pope in their religion. When beset by monsters, Farnese asks herself, "Is this retribution?" Much like Rhea, Farnese is a character marked by complexity and inner turmoil. A strange child with a rebellious streak, she longs for the approval and love of her parents, yet receives none. Her father, cold and distant, allows her to grow up in isolation, deprived of emotional nourishment or attention. Eventually, she is sent away on a mission which, though seemingly important, serves more as a way to occupy her time. Later, it becomes clear that her father's decision to send her away was driven by fear of her rebellious nature. In a similar vein, when Rhea faces death, she utters the word "Father." Coupled with her earlier question, "Is this my punishment?" This could suggest that she was not a perfect follower of the faith, and was possibly sent away by her father as a form of discipline. Of course, it's also possible that she had a loving father and simply thinks of him in her final moments. Alternatively, her mission might be a rite of passage that every member of her noble house must undertake to reach adulthood. In either case, it seems unlikely that Rhea holds a position of great respect within the church hierarchy. Although she was born into a high station, she hasn't earned the right to be privy to the inner workings of the Way of White. Petros, who refers to Rhea's companions as her old schoolmates, implies that both she and her companions have only recently completed their education. He also calls the knights young and refers to Rhea as a little madam, all of which underscores their youth and naivety. Rhea herself admits to being inexperienced, blaming the loss of her companions on her ignorance and frailty. Given this, we shouldn't expect to gain deep insights into the Way of White through Rhea and her companions. Next, we turn to Petros. His name, meaning stone in Greek, perhaps reflects the hardness of his heart. Although Petros may not have been born into a high position, and might even have been sent to his current post due to past misdeeds, he is certainly well practiced in his role. He manages to escape the Tomb of the Giants, and might have done so before, given Patch's familiarity with him. Petros knows how to handle volatile undead like us, and he's cunning enough to try to dispose of Rhea after failing to protect her. Or perhaps he was merely following orders. He remarks that Rhea is not worth her salt without her family name, suggesting that Rhea's demise might have been the true purpose of the mission, a way to get rid of her discreetly. It could have been an indirect execution, intended to remove Rhea from the family, as she had fallen out of grace and lost her right to the name of Thorolend. In any case, Petrus likely knows more about the darker aspects of the Way of White. The first hints of this are found hidden beneath Firelink's shrine: a talisman, a morning star, some cracked red eye orbs, and a few Lloyd's talismans. These hidden items already suggest an air of secrecy. The morning star, a spiked cleric weapon, along with a Lloyd's talisman, hints at a degree of cruelty within the Church's practices. Further evidence of the Way of White's questionable nature is seen in how Petrus measures our faith. He requires us to demonstrate our faith by giving him 700 souls. A clear example of the Church leveraging belief, faith, or superstition for its own gain. Throughout the world of Dark Souls, there is little evidence of the Way of White acting as a positive force. Instead, it seems to be an abusive one. This is further supported by the cleric helm item, which states that warrior clerics were known for being unyielding in battle. Some of these warriors were high-level priests sent on missions. In this context, missions refers to the religious calling to spread faith across the world. The fact that they resorted to violence suggests that these were not peaceful endeavors. Rather, they were campaigns of forced conversion, spreading the faith through conquest. This further cements the notion that the Way of White is not a peaceful religion, but one willing to use force to achieve its aims. When Petrus believes that Rhea is of no consequence due to her loss of status, does he hesitate to commit evil acts? No. He shows no concern for the wrath of the gods, which he mentions when threatening to punish us. He isn't worried about divine intervention in the slightest, revealing that all his previous decency was merely a facade, a wolf in sheep's clothing. As he admits this, we realize that while he may be a follower of the Church, he is not a true believer in any higher power. This raises the question, does Petrus represent a broader trend within the Way of White? This brings us to the critical question: to what extent do the members of the Church truly believe in a higher power? We don't encounter any specifically high-ranking individuals within the Way of White, but we do have clues about their beliefs through the various talismans in the game. These talismans provide insight into the nature of faith within the Church. The first is the basic talisman, the standard issue for common believers. This talisman scales with faith, indicating that the devotion of common believers is measured by their faith. Just as the simple follower Vince is sent on a pilgrimage and blindly follows orders, so do the ordinary members of the Church. Next, we have the ivory talisman, which is issued only to female clerics. If the Way of White is structured like other patriarchal religions, such as the Catholic Church with its Pope or the Holy See in Berserk with its Pontiff, then higher positions like bishops may be reserved for men. Most female members of the Way of White are referred to as maidens, suggesting that cleric might be the highest title a woman can achieve. This implies that lower in the Church hierarchy, high faith is required, as indicated by the ivory talisman scaling with faith. Alternatively, it could be that high faith is necessary for women, because only women can become firekeepers, and the church may hope that strong faith will lead them to take up this sacred duty, as seen in Irina of Karim's questline in a later game. Lloyd's talisman is not used for casting miracles, and the Dark Moon talisman is not connected to the Way of White. This leaves us with the Thorolund talisman, which is explicitly granted only to her-ranking clerics of Thorolund. Interestingly, this talisman's magic adjustment does not depend on faith. This is unusual. One would expect that those of high standing in the church would want their talisman's power to correlate with their faith. If the divine protection granted by this talisman doesn't rely on faith, it raises the possibility that the church leaders themselves lack true belief in their own doctrines. Could it be that the leaders of the Way of White actually have no faith in the teachings they pass down? Could the followers of the Way of White be placing their faith in a false doctrine, one that has been fabricated by non-believers to manipulate them for their own purposes? This concept is worth exploring further. The discrepancy between the talismans, the behavior of church leaders like Petros, and the overall lack of genuine faith among those in power suggests a deeper corruption within the Way of White. The true believers, those like Vince and Rhea, are merely pawns, blind to the truth that those who lead them may not believe in the very gods they claim to serve. Velka's talisman, while not directly associated with the Way of White, adds to the notion of a corrupted faith. The rebel goddess Velka's talisman scales with intelligence instead of faith, implying that those who are more intelligent do not need faith to wield power. This stands in contrast to the low-level members of the Way of White, particularly women and new initiates, who are burdened with the need for unwavering faith, essentially forced to believe without evidence. Solaire's talisman further suggests that the faith within the Way of White may have become corrupted. It raises the possibility that those in power within the church, who are responsible for guiding the flock, might not possess any faith at all, or at least not in the doctrines they espouse. This idea is reinforced by various elements within the game, such as Havel's rebellion. If Havel, who was once part of the Way of White, chose to defect and rebel against all Father Lloyd, it suggests that he found the church to be fundamentally flawed or false. Abandoning the church in his status as bishop would be a drastic move, unlikely to occur if the faith were truly grounded in truth. Another piece of evidence comes from Anastasia, the Firelink Shrine Firekeeper. She has been imprisoned and maimed, supposedly to prevent her from blaspheming against the gods. This extreme measure suggests that she may have witnessed something so damning that the religious authorities felt compelled to silence her. The fact that she is from Astora does not entirely rule out the Way of White as being involved in her imprisonment, further hinting at the church's potential involvement in darker deeds. The dialogue of Patches also supports the idea that the faith of the Way of White might be a sham. Patches sells a Thorolund talisman, indicating that he has had dealings with clerics. He's seen many low-level clerics pass through on their missions, and perhaps even encountered some high-ranking ones. The fact that Patches, who is no cleric, has a Thorolund talisman suggests that he obtained it from a high-level cleric at some point, possibly implying a fallen or corrupt cleric. When Patches asks the player if they are a cleric, the response affects his dialogue in a telling way. If the player says they are a cleric, Patches wishes them luck with their pilgrimage or mission, though it's clear from his later criticism that he has a deep-seated disdain for the clergy. If the player dies by Patch's hand, he remarks, "The righteous prevail again," which could be interpreted as either delusion or a sarcastic jab at the hypocrisy of the church. If the player attacks him after claiming to be a cleric, Patras exclaims, "Take your higher cause and stuff it, you lousy charlatan." The term charlatan directly accuses the clerics of being frauds, individuals who falsely claim to have special knowledge or insight. This accusation aligns with the implications of the talismans, which suggests that those in the higher echelons of the Way of White are not true believers. Instead, they may be manipulating the faith for their own purposes, leading a flock that is blind to the deception. The disparity between the common believers who must have faith and the leaders who seemingly require none paints a picture of a religious institution steeped in dishonesty and corruption. The Way of White, much like the church institutions in other works, notably Berserk, seems to be a faith built on a foundation of deception and manipulation. The leaders of this faith may play the role of pious clerics, but their behavior suggests they are more akin to con artists. Patches, a character known for trickery, ironically becomes a reliable source of truth when he discusses the clerics, particularly Petrus. He dismisses Petrus as a self-proclaimed cleric and labels him as scum, extending his condemnation to all clerics by calling them rotten. This aligns with the recurring theme of dishonesty and false piety within the Way of White. Patch's disdain for the clerics, combined with his accurate warnings about other NPCs, suggests that the religion is fundamentally deceitful. This raises the question of whether the followers are merely sheep being led astray by wolves, or if they are guided by well-intentioned shepherds. Even if the leaders of the Way of White know the doctrine is false, they might justify their teachings by believing they provide hope to the people. However, the overwhelming evidence of corruption, such as the locking up of maidens, the punishment of Rhea, the brutal undead hunts, and the exchange of spiritual status for material gain, makes this unlikely. The parallels with Berserk further illuminate the nature of the Way of White. In Berserk, the Holy See is a powerful religious institution followed by a large portion of the population. The followers, and even the high-ranking members, are often ignorant of the harm their teachings cause. They are seduced by opaque doctrines and blindly follow them, even when these teachings lead to atrocities. This ignorance ultimately allows Griffith, a demon disguised as a savior, to ascend to power, with the church inadvertently aiding in the creation of a hellish world for humans. The Way of White shares several similarities with the Holy See. Both institutions use the caduceus symbol, a recurring motif in Berserk and seen in Dark Souls through the caduceus kite shield. wielded by Vince and Nico. Both institutions are also obsessed with the concept of heresy, as evidenced by Ria's question of whether the player is a heretic or merely hollow when attacked. Miyazaki's works consistently feature themes of cruel and manipulative religious institutions. From Demon Souls to the Dark Souls series and Bloodborne. In each of these worlds, the Church is a deceitful and shady entity with hidden motives that ultimately harm its followers. The Way of White appears to be no exception, leading its followers in a direction that benefits the leaders but is detrimental to the common believers. This brings us to the connection between the Way of White and the Curse of Undeath. The Way of White is known to hunt the undead in the present day and is likely responsible for rounding them up and sending them to the north. However, the Church's involvement with the undead may go back much further in history. The undead curse, which the Church hunts so fervently, might be tied to the Church's origins or hidden motives. The timeline video suggests that the undead legend is a recent fabrication, meaning that the Church's role in the Curse of Undeath could be more sinister than it appears. The first recorded case of undeath in a humanoid is Paladin Leroy, a character deeply associated with the Way of White. This connection raises questions about the Church's true role in the emergence and perpetuation of the undead curse. Could it be that the Way of White has not only failed to protect humanity from the curse, but has actively contributed to its spread, all while maintaining the facade of a righteous and pious institution? The idea that the Way of White actively produces undead is a chilling revelation in the Dark Souls lore. The item description of the Paladin Helm, which states that long ago, the Way of White produced its first undead, implies that the undead curse is not merely a random affliction, but something that can be intentionally applied or manufactured. This suggests that the curse is not a natural occurrence, but could be a deliberate act, possibly carried out by the Church itself. The notion that the Way of White continued to produce undead after the first one is deeply paradoxical, especially considering that the Church is known for hunting undead in the present day. This raises questions about the Church's true motives and the role it plays in the spread of the curse. If the Way of White has the power to create undead, it implies that they may be complicit in the very phenomenon they claim to oppose. Further evidence supporting the idea that the undead curse can be actively applied is found in various item descriptions. The Watchtower basement key, for example, refers to rumors of a hero turned hollow who was locked away by a dear friend. The phrasing here, turned hollow, implies that the hero's transformation into a hollow was not a natural event, but something that was done to him. The key's description hints at a sense of revenge or punishment, suggesting that the curse could be used as a tool for retribution. Similarly, the Baldur Helm description states that Baldur came to ruin after a great many undead were spawned. The use of the passive verb "was spawned" once again implies that the creation of undead was an intentional act rather than a random occurrence. This idea is further supported by the Helm of Darkmoon Nitus, which states that after becoming undead, she visited Dark Sun Gwyndolin. This phrasing suggests that becoming undead was part of an active process, possibly one that she participated in willingly. The Still Helm also supports this theory, noting that countless knights of Baronique, once extolled as the mightiest of the mighty, became undead and ventured to Lordran. The use of the phrase "became undead" implies that this was a conscious decision, possibly made to access the treacherous lands of Lordran, which are nearly impossible to traverse without being undead. This idea is reinforced by characters like Laurentius and Solaire, who suggest that becoming undead might be a choice made to gain access to the lands of Lordran. Laurentius speaks of the day he became undead with a sense of ecstasy, viewing it as an opportunity to attune himself to the ancient art of pyromancy. Solaire too leaves no room for doubt, explicitly stating that he chose to become undead. In sum, the evidence points to a dark truth. The undead curse is not merely a random or natural occurrence, but something that can be intentionally applied, possibly by the Way of White itself. This revelation paints the Church in an even more sinister light, suggesting that it may be actively creating the very curse it claims to combat, all while maintaining its facade of piety and righteousness. The concept of becoming undead in Dark Souls is portrayed not as a random affliction, but as a deliberate choice or an enforced punishment. This notion is exemplified by Solaire, who explicitly states that he became undead to pursue his mission of finding his own son. For Solaire, becoming undead is a means to an end, allowing him to traverse the dangerous lands of Lordran, indicating that the process of becoming undead can be voluntary and is not inherently seen as a curse or a plague. This perspective is particularly significant because Solaire operates outside the influence of the Way of White, which suggests that his view on becoming undead is untainted by the Church's propaganda. The Sewer's Chamber key further supports the idea that the undead curse is something that can be inflicted on individuals as a form of punishment or revenge. The key's description mentions that in certain communities, individuals exhibiting greed could be turned undead and banished to the depths, implying that the undead curse can be actively applied to someone rather than being a random occurrence. This description suggests a more sinister and deliberate use of the undead curse as a tool for controlling or punishing individuals deemed unworthy. The dark sign itself, as described in the game, provides a critical piece of evidence for the deliberate nature of the undead curse. The description states that those branded with the dark sign are accursed undead, with the word branded implying a conscious and intentional act. This branding is reminiscent of marking livestock, criminals, or slaves, further reinforcing the idea that the undead curse is imposed upon individuals by an external force, possibly the Way of White. This branding process aligns with the idea that the Church views its followers as a flock, with the undead being the marked outcasts or tools to be used for specific purposes. The intro cinematic of Dark Souls offers a subtle yet telling visual clue that supports this interpretation. The scene where a maiden sits with a corpse in a cemetery, while the narrator speaks of the living bearing the dark sign, raises questions about the nature of the curse. The corpse, dressed in battle armor, does not appear to be involved in a recent battle, suggesting it may be a long-dead hero being buried or perhaps even exhumed. The eerie solitude of the scene hints at something more sinister, possibly the branding of the dark sign on the deceased, which would transform them into undead. This moment in the intro serves as a visual metaphor for the church's role in the undead curse. The Way of White, much like the church in Berserk, is shown to be a manipulative institution that may be responsible for inflicting the curse on individuals, branding them with the dark sign as a means of control or punishment. The church's portrayal as a deceitful and malevolent force, both in Dark Souls and in Berserk, highlights the thematic connection between the two works, emphasizing the use of religious institutions as instruments of oppression and manipulation. In conclusion, the undead curse in Dark Souls appears to be far more than a random affliction. It is a deliberately applied condition, possibly by the Way of White, used to control, punish, or even create undead for specific purposes. This dark secret, hinted at through item descriptions and subtle narrative clues, reveals a deeper layer of the game's lore, where the institutions that claim to protect the living may, in fact, be the very ones condemning them to undeath. The scene you describe from Dark Souls is rich with symbolism and subtle narrative clues that suggest a ritualistic process is at play in the creation of the undead. The second peculiarity you mention, that the dark sign is not initially visible on the body, raises significant questions about the nature of undeath and how it is imposed. When we first see the body in the cemetery, it behaves as a normal dead body would, showing no signs of the dark sign that typically marks an undead. This absence of the dark sign suggests that the body is not yet undead, despite its death. The introduction of ritualistic chanting in the background further hints at something more deliberate and magical occurring, rather than a natural process of death and undeath. This chanting is out of place for a scene of mourning, reinforcing the idea that this is a ritual rather than a simple burial. The ritualistic nature of this scene becomes clearer when we observe the maiden's actions. As she reaches for a spark in the air, it is reminiscent of the act of kindling, a process intimately tied to humanity and the undead. The rite of kindling, an art passed down among clerics, involves using humanity to bolster bonfires, essentially igniting the humanity within. The imagery associated with this process in the game, where a humanity sprite writhes in pain as it ignites, parallels the maiden's careful handling of the spark. Miyazaki and his team painstakingly worked on this scene, as noted in the DesignWorks interview, to ensure that the act of the maiden grasping the spark appeared as a prayer. A delicate and reverent act meant to protect something fragile. This deliberate portrayal of the maiden's actions suggests that what she is doing is more than just a ritual. It is a process of transformation, turning the deceased into the undead. As the maiden lowers the spark toward the body, we finally see the dark sign appear on the skin. The dark sign, which initially was not present, begins to flicker into life as if it is being kindled, much like a fire. This act of kindling the dark sign within the body is symbolic of lighting the humanity within, a process that transforms the once dead body into an undead being. This scene reveals that the process of becoming undead is not just a random curse, but can be actively induced through a ritual. The clergy, or those with knowledge of this dark art, appear to have the power to ignite the humanity within a deceased person, turning them into undead. This act raises ethical questions about the clergy's role in this process. Are they reviving the dead as a form of punishment, or is it a deliberate creation of undead soldiers or followers? The item description for humanity deepens this mystery by questioning the difference between the humanity held by the undead and that within a true human. This distinction, or lack thereof, suggests that the clergy may not see much difference between the living and the dead, as they are willing to ignite the humanity within anyone, potentially against their will. The scene, therefore, serves as a critical moment in the game's lore, subtly revealing that the undead curse is not merely a natural or random event, but is, in fact, a product of ritualistic and deliberate actions by those in power. The act of kindling the dark sign within a dead body marks the beginning of the undead's cursed existence. An existence that is not naturally occurring but imposed through a dark ritual. As we come to the end of this tale, the shadows of Lordran seem a little darker, the flames a little dimmer. The Way of White, once thought to be a guiding light in the world, is revealed as something far more complex and sinister. In a land where the line between life and death blurs, where even heroes can be shackled by the curse of undeath, the truth is often hidden beneath layers of deception. The chosen undead's journey is one of discovery, not just of ancient powers and forgotten gods, but of the very nature of the world they inhabit. They uncover secrets that have been buried deep, truths that challenge everything they thought they knew. The Way of White, with its rituals and its faith, is but one piece of a vast and intricate puzzle. A puzzle that may never be fully solved, even by those who walk the path of the undead. So as you drift off to sleep, let your thoughts wander through the winding paths of Lordran. Remember that in this world, nothing is as it seems. The flames may flicker, but they never truly die. Just as the undead rise again and again, and somewhere in the darkness, the truth waits to be uncovered by those brave enough to seek it. Good night, and may your dreams be free from the curse of the dark sign. Rest well, for the journey continues with the dawn.